Hey everybody, it's Andy, and welcome again to my office in Modesto, California. If you're new to the channel, I'm an attorney licensed to practice law in California as well as New York. And in this video, what I'm going to try to do, this will probably be the first part of this video actually, but what I'm going to try to do in these videos is to go over the California divorce process from the very beginning to the very end, from soup to nuts basically. The reason I want to do that is because I see a lot of people kind of, face to face, in court and stuff, as well as online, who are basically stuck, for lack of a better word. Like they started the divorce themselves and it's taken 5 years or whatever, and they have spent, thousands of dollars, but they're still not done. They don't know what to do next. They're just sick of it. They want it to be over, etc. So that's basically who this, who these videos rather, two parts, 3 parts, whatever. That's who these videos are aimed at. And I guess hopefully, at the end of all these videos, hopefully you can see basically that the process overall is actually not that complicated. But the vast majority of people, especially if they're doing the case themselves, they basically have never gotten divorced before. This is their first time. They never thought they'd be here. Or it's something where they got divorced once before, but it was years ago and they don't remember what they did and so on. So if you're unfamiliar with any process, divorce, or something else, if you're unfamiliar with any process, it's basically going to be confusing regardless. Like, you can be the most intelligent person, you can prepare as best you can, but if you do anything the first time, you're generally going to be confused, make mistakes. The second time, the third time, probably not. But yeah, like if you're doing it the first time and you don't quite understand what to do, you want to do the right thing, but you don't know what it is. That's why you feel stuck, and you don't want to do the wrong thing, and so on. So it gets to be a gigantic kind of cascade of kind of difficulty, I suppose. But the basic idea, hopefully, at the end of these videos is that you'll see, oh, the process actually makes sense. The process, okay, this is the big picture. I'm stuck in this little part right here. I can't see the big picture, but now that I do, it's a lot less confusing. This is what I need to do next. That's my hope, I guess, at the end of all these videos, that you'll understand where you are in the process, what the next step is, how to get there, etc., etc. So hopefully that helps. So on this part, I'm probably going to go over at least 2 things right now. In subsequent videos, I'll go over other stuff. But the first part I want to go over is kind of like a preamble or some kind of points to remember, hopefully. The first part, which I think I just alluded to a little bit, basically is that a divorce in California, they vary, obviously. Like no two divorces are exactly the same. But I guess the process overall is just a checklist. So if you can imagine a checklist of tasks that you have to do in order to accomplish a goal, you need to basically, for example, if you're running a marathon, you need to buy some shoes, you need to wake up early, you need to eat right, train, you need to build a schedule about, oh, hey, this week I'm going to run 5 miles, then 10 miles, then 15, blah, blah. So a checklist kind of like that applies to divorces also. So the items on this checklist are going to depend based on what the facts of your case are. So for instance, if you have minor children, your checklist will look different than somebody who doesn't have minor children, let's say. Because minor children, you have to talk about custody, visitation, child support, etc. So once all of these items on this proverbial checklist, this metaphorical checklist rather, are basically resolved somehow, then it's going to be something where that item can be checked off and you move on to the next item. Once all the items are done, then you're going to hopefully get a signed judgment, a signed FL-180. I've harped about this on my channel before. I actually have a video on this also. I'll link that up there. But in order to have a divorce be done in California, you have to have a signed FL-180, Judicial Council Form FL-180, signed by a judge. That is your proof that you are divorced. If you don't have that and you just filed your case and kind of sat back and thought that the divorce was automatically done, that's not the case. You have to have a signed FL-180 form from the judge. That is your goal, I suppose, for continuing the checklist kind of metaphor. So yeah, basically like that's a checklist that you have to go through. The checklist varies depending on the facts of your case. The checklist is not personal. Like, it's not something where the court wants to personally mess with you, or the court hates you, the judge hates you, etc. It is a checklist. It applies to everybody who's going through a divorce. Once you finish the checklist, your divorce is done. That's basically how it works. So how do you resolve the items on the checklist? That's point number 2 in my kind of preamble kind of speech. So the items on the checklist, you can basically resolve them two ways. The first one is you negotiate with the other party, the other spouse in your case. Okay, for the debt, this is how I propose to divide it. What do you think, et cetera, et cetera. So if you are in a divorce, as you can probably guess, negotiation, I think you guys have probably tried that, or a lot of people in that situation probably have tried that. You're in divorce court because it has not worked. Like the negotiation has not worked. So negotiation, obviously there is no kind of foolproof or kind of guaranteed way to do it. You have to, I hate to say fly by the seat of your pants, but it is something where you do kind of have to improvise a little bit based on the facts of the situation, based on the feedback you're getting, based on how the other party reacts, blah, blah. Negotiation is kind of improvisational by definition. So when you negotiate, obviously you want to consider your pros, your cons, your costs, your benefits, what your best alternative is if the negotiation fails, and so on. If that doesn't work, like if negotiation doesn't work and you really have tried your best, I suppose, the only other option is trial. And that basically involves having the court decide how the debt is going to be divided. The court will decide who gets the kids. The court will decide what child support is, and so on. So if you want to do it that way, you certainly can. In some cases, like I said, like it is kind of unavoidable that you have to have the court decide it because negotiation just does not work. Here's the thing. If you are going to go to trial, like just kind of know what's involved in it, know the costs, the financial costs, know the time required, and also know that basically a lot of judges, well, I shouldn't say a lot of judges, it's not a guarantee, let's put it that way. It's not a guarantee that the judge will view your case in the same way that you view your case. So it's something where, I guess to put it this way, a lot of people overestimate how likely the judge is to agree with them. So, the judge basically, judges by definition are impartial. They are people who look at the facts, the law, the evidence, and so on. So, you have to put yourself in the judge's shoes. Like basically, okay, I feel that my case is strong for all these reasons. If I step back and look at my case objectively, though, if I pretend I'm the judge, what would I think? Like if I kind of step back from the case and kind of look at it dispassionately, what would I think about the case? Would I rule for me, for example? I think more people probably should do that because a lot of times judges basically rule differently, and a trial oftentimes will leave both parties dissatisfied in some way. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Certainly don't mean to convince you not to go to trial. Trial by definition is what courts are for, I guess. But you should not kind of cavalierly, I guess, or casually kind of commit to a trial. Trials do involve a lot of work, expense, and you have to make sure that it's all worth it. That's all. So that's point number 2. Point number 3, there is only one divorce process in California. So the thing is, if you kind of think, oh, well, hey, I can pay some more money and kind of jump the line or get special treatment or something, that's not how it works. At the end of these videos, hopefully you should see that the kind of the divorce process is, it's the same for everybody. That said, however, I will kind of explain that there are ways to make the process go faster. And the analogy that I'll draw basically is for air travel. So if you're going to fly from San Francisco to New York or LA to Chicago or something, you can fly commercial, of course, like go to the airport, stand in line, check your baggage, etc. Or if you can afford it, you can fly private. Like you can buy a fractional one. Number one, you could buy a plane. If you do buy a plane, let me know. But if you can't afford to buy a plane, maybe you have a fractional plane or something. Basically, you can fly private and bypass the normal chaos, I guess, that comes with commercial air travel. So the divorce process in California kind of works the same way. You have the normal process, the public process, the commercial airline kind of version, where basically everybody goes to court and they file paperwork and everybody is kind of equal that way. But if you are, for example, a celebrity, or if you're a professional athlete and you're a tech executive and you kind of would appear in gossip newspapers or gossip websites, for example, maybe you don't want to file your case the normal way because you might have to disclose your finances, disclose all this personal information. That stuff could end up on a gossip website. It could end up on social media or something. And maybe if you're a celebrity, like a famous person, you don't want your personal information kind of floating out there. So if you are that, you can go through the private process also. That's the private, private plane sort of analogy. But Yeah, so the thing is, the rules for the private process are the same. Like, you just have to basically pay for your own judge. You can hire something called a private judge, and you can finish the case that way, and so on. So that's the basic idea. There's one process, but there's at least two different ways to actually do it. Usually, it's financial kind of motivation that causes parties to want to do the public process versus the private process, and so on. So yeah, that's point number 3. Point number four. This is just my own personal kind of observation. If you are going to go through a divorce and you're the one who files for a divorce, you need to be committed and you need to be sure that this is the right course for you. I mean, nobody can answer that question. I certainly can't. Nobody can answer that question for you except you. So whatever reasons, whatever kind of benefit you kind of think will come from getting a divorce, you need to be sure that that's what you want. You need to be sure that what you're doing will help get you there, and so on. The reason is because divorces, by definition, involve a lot of time, cost, emotional anguish, mental energy. It'll have consequences for your family also. Sometimes basically divorced spouses get along fairly well afterwards. They're better as friends, etc. But a lot of times divorced spouses hate each other, for the rest of their lives. If you have children, the divorce will affect your children also. So whatever kind of decision you make, you just have to make sure that basically a divorce is the correct one that you make, it's the correct course for you, and you're committed to doing it. You're going to persevere. You're not going to give up. Whenever something bad happens or the other party says that they want to reconcile or something, you need to be sure, because all of the kind of costs involved, like the financial, the emotional, the time, the effects on your family, and so on, you need to make sure that that is, I guess, worth it. You should not enter into a divorce cavalierly or casually, for example. I guess that's all that I'm trying to say. So hopefully that helps. So that's just the preamble part. I think as I've kind of been speaking, I think I'm going to change my tactic a little bit. So I'm going to end the video here. In the next part, I'm going to go over probably the petition stage as well as the service of the petition. So it's 2 stages hopefully. Yeah. So in the next video, I'm going to go over that. So I will talk to you then. Thanks.